At my daughter's wake, my son-in-law's mistress leaned over the casket and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Don't worry, honey. I'm going to spend the millions in your account a hell of a lot better than you ever did." And then something impossible happened, something that made me question my own sanity. I heard a giggle, a soft, almost imperceptible laugh coming from inside the casket, because that woman, truthfully, had no idea who she was messing with. Neither she nor anyone else in that room knew the truth that was about to come to light. But let me back up a bit. Let me tell you how I arrived at that moment, standing in the city's most elegant funeral home, watching a stranger mock my daughter's body while everyone else cried tears that felt rehearsed. My name is Lucille Mason. I am 70 years old, and my life has been defined by absolute dedication to my family. For decades, my world revolved around one person, Danielle, my daughter. From the moment she was born, I knew she was special, intelligent, determined, with a light in her eyes that promised greatness. And I wasn't wrong. Danielle became an extraordinary woman, a successful tech entrepreneur who built her empire from scratch. While others in this country inherited fortunes or relied on trust funds, she created hers with hard work, strategy, and a vision few possessed. I lived to watch her grow. I sacrificed so much to always be present. Her father walked out on us when she was just 5 years old, leaving us in a cramped apartment in Queens. Since then, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously, waitressing, cleaning offices, and retail to pay for the best education. I sewed her clothes until she could afford to buy her own. I watched her graduate from an Ivy League university. I watched her launch her first startup. I watched her conquer every goal she set for herself, and I also watched her fall in love with Lawrence. Lawrence Sterling entered our lives 8 years ago. He was handsome, polished, with smooth words and a smile that seemed sincere, the kind of all-American charm you see in magazines. Danielle fell hard for him, and I wanted to believe my daughter had found happiness. I wanted to believe this man would love her as much as I did. I swallowed my doubts when I noticed how he checked his Rolex every time Danielle talked about her business. I ignored the way his eyes lit up when she mentioned stock options and contracts, but glazed over when she spoke of her dreams. I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother, that I should trust my daughter's judgment. Now, standing in front of her casket, that decision burned like acid in my chest. The viewing room was packed. Danielle had touched many lives with her generosity and charisma. White lilies covered every available surface, and their sweet, cloying scent was making me dizzy. People filed past one by one, offering their condolences in hushed tones and giving awkward hugs. I nodded mechanically, not really processing their words. Everything seemed wrapped in a thick fog, as if I were watching the scene from miles away. Lawrence was standing on the other side of the casket. My son-in-law wore an impeccable black Armani suit with a gray tie that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. His face showed exactly the right expression, contained pain, red-rimmed eyes, a sadness that looked authentic to anyone who didn't know him well. But I knew him. And there was something about the way he breathed, the way his shoulders didn't really slump with the weight of grief, that disturbed me. His tears seemed measured, calculated, as if he had practiced in front of a mirror exactly how much to cry to look devastated without ruining his complexion. Every so often, someone would approach him and squeeze his shoulder in solidarity. It was so sudden, they said. She was so young, so full of life. And Lawrence nodded, accepting the comfort with a humility that turned my stomach, though I couldn't explain exactly why. Then I saw her walk in. She was a woman of about 35, tall, with chestnut hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. She wore a fitted black dress that, while technically appropriate for a funeral, seemed designed to draw attention. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with a confidence that didn't match the solemnity of the moment. Her face was carefully composed in an expression of sorrow, but her eyes scanned the room with an almost hungry curiosity. When her eyes met Lawrence's, something passed between them. It was barely a second, an exchange so brief anyone could have missed it, but I didn't. I saw his lips tense slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture. I saw her look down, but not before a small smirk touched the corners of her mouth. Familiarity, complicity, something that shouldn't exist between a recent widower and a stranger at his wife's funeral. The woman advanced toward the casket with measured steps. She stopped in front of Danielle, clasped her hands as if in prayer, and bowed her head. From where I stood, I could see her profile. Her lips moved as if she were praying or saying something in silence. I leaned in a little closer, not knowing why I felt the need to listen. And then I heard it. Her voice was barely a whisper, so low I had to strain to catch the words. "Don't worry, honey," she murmured with a poisonous sweetness. "I'm going to spend the millions in your account a hell of a lot better than you ever did. Lawrence and I are going to make sure every dollar is used on things that are actually enjoyable." The world stopped. My heart beat once, hard and painful against my ribs. The air left my lungs. Every sound in the room faded into a distant hum. My entire being focused on those words, on the cruelty with which they had been spoken. And then, in that absolute internal silence, I heard it. A soft laugh, barely audible but unmistakable. A giggle that seemed to come from inside the casket, from where my daughter's motionless body lay. My legs almost gave out. My hands gripped the edge of the casket to keep me upright. I looked at Danielle's face, searching for any movement, any sign that I hadn't imagined that sound. But she remained still, eyes closed, hands crossed over her chest, as motionless as death itself. I had imagined it. It was my mind cracking under the weight of grief. I looked up at the woman. She had straightened up and was now looking directly at me. For an instant, our eyes met, and in hers, I saw something that confirmed this wasn't a product of my imagination. I saw fear just for a second, but it was there, as if she had heard something too, as if she knew she had made a terrible mistake. Then she blinked, and the expression vanished. She gave me a small, pitying smile, the kind offered to grieving old ladies, and walked away toward where Lawrence was waiting. I watched them as she approached him. They didn't hug, they didn't touch, but they stood closer than was appropriate. He tilted his head toward her, and on his lips I could read a name. Paula. Paula. Now I had a name to put to that face, to put to that threat whispered over my daughter's body. The rest of the wake passed like a movie in slow motion. I remained by Danielle's casket, my hand resting on the polished wood rim, while people continued to parade past with their empty condolences. But my mind was no longer there. It was trapped in that impossible moment, in that laugh that had sprung from the silence, in the poisoned words that woman Paula had spoken, as if sharing a delicious secret with a dead friend. Millions in the account. Lawrence and I. Spend every dollar. The words spun in my head like a sickly whirlwind. How did she know about Danielle's money? Why did she speak as if she had a right to touch it? And why did Lawrence, my son-in-law, the man who supposedly loved my daughter, show not a shred of surprise at her presence? I looked over to where they were chatting now, in a discreet corner of the room. From a distance, it looked like an appropriate conversation, the kind of brief exchange that happens at these events. But I knew the language bodies speak when they think no one is watching. The way he leaned toward her, creating a bubble of intimacy. The way her fingers grazed his sleeve for just a second before pulling back. The deep familiarity that exists only between two people who have shared more than words. My daughter wasn't even cold in her grave, and they were already behaving like accomplices, like conspirators. I felt a pressure in my chest, but it wasn't just pain. It was something darker, sharper. It was the first spark of a suspicion I still didn't dare name. "Mrs. Mason?" A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to find the kind face of Doris, my neighbor of 20 years. She had been a silent constant in my existence. The woman who lived 3 houses down in our suburban cul-de-sac and had always been there for the big moments. When Danielle graduated, when she opened her first office, when she married Lawrence. "I am so sorry," Doris said, taking my hands in hers. Her eyes, clouded by age but still sharp, showed genuine sadness. Danielle was like a daughter to me, too. "Thank you, Doris," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. It's hard to believe." "I know." Doris squeezed my hands. "An accident so sudden, so unfair." She paused, and something in her expression changed. Her eyes flicked briefly toward where Lawrence and Paula were talking. "Do you know that woman?" she asked in a low voice, almost casual, but with a note of something deeper underneath. "No," I admitted. "I've never seen her before." Doris nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something she already suspected. "Me neither, but Lawrence certainly seems to know her quite well, don't you think?" It wasn't really a question. It was an observation disguised as an innocent comment, the kind women of our generation have perfected over decades of reading between the lines. Before I could answer, Lawrence walked over to us. His face had regained that mask of controlled grief. "Lucille," he said, using my first name as he always had, with a familiarity that had once seemed affectionate and now felt invasive. "You should sit down for a while. You've been standing all afternoon. It's not good for you at your age." At your age, as if I were a fragile relic that needed reminding of its limitations, as if the pain of losing a daughter could be cured just by sitting down. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I want to stay with Danielle." Something crossed his face. Irritation? Impatience? It vanished so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Of course," he said, adjusting his tie, a gesture I recognized as suppressed nervousness. "I just worry about you. Danielle would want you to take care of yourself." "Don't mention what Danielle would want," I wanted to scream at him. "Don't you dare use my dead daughter to manipulate me." But I said nothing. I just nodded because I was still the Lucille Mason everyone knew. The quiet mother, the compliant mother-in-law, the old lady who didn't cause trouble. Lawrence walked away after giving my shoulder a squeeze that felt more like a warning than a comfort. Doris stayed by my side in solitary silence for a few more minutes before discreetly excusing herself. The following hours were a blur of faces and voices. Business colleagues of Danielle's sharing anecdotes about her brilliance, friends lamenting her loss, distant relatives who had barely been present in her life but were now crying as if they'd lost someone irreplaceable. And all the while, I watched. I watched Lawrence move through the room with practiced grace, accepting condolences, shaking hands, playing the role of the shattered widower perfectly. But there were moments, small gaps between conversations, where his mask slipped. When he thought no one was looking, his eyes would drift to Paula. She never approached him again after that first conversation, smartly staying on the sidelines, but I could feel the invisible connection vibrating between them like a live wire. And then there were the smaller details, the ones only a mother would notice. Lawrence checked his iPhone way too often for someone at a funeral. Every time he did, his thumbs moved fast, typing brief texts before sliding the device back into his pocket with an almost furtive movement. Once, I saw Paula pull out her own phone seconds after he put his away. The timing was too perfect to be random. There was more. The way Lawrence kept a certain distance from Danielle's casket, as if getting too close caused him actual physical discomfort. Other grieving people cling to the physical remains of their loved ones. They need that proximity. They touch the casket, adjust the flowers, seek comfort in closeness. Lawrence did not. He orbited around it but never stayed too long, as if my daughter's body was something he preferred to forget rather than remember. And there was his clothes. The suit was brand new. I could tell by the way the fabric sat perfectly on his shoulders, without a wrinkle, without the natural wear that comes with use. Who buys a brand new suit for their wife's funeral? Who has the presence of mind to worry about fashion when they should be destroyed by grief? When they finally began to close the casket for the burial the next day, I felt something inside me break definitively. This would be the last time I would see my daughter's face, the last time I could be close to her. At least in this tangible form. The tears I had been holding back for hours finally spilled over, hot and bitter, burning tracks down my wrinkled cheeks. I leaned over the casket one last time, my hand trembling as I touched Danielle's cold cheek. "Forgive me," I whispered, so low no one else could hear. "Forgive me for not protecting you, for not seeing what was right in front of me." And then, as my fingers rested on her icy skin, I felt something. It wasn't movement, it wasn't a sound. It was something more subtle, more disturbing. Under her right hand, crossed over her chest in that traditional funeral gesture, there was a small lump, something that shouldn't be there. I looked around quickly. The funeral director was busy talking to some attendees. Lawrence was chatting with a group of people near the entrance. No one was paying attention to me. The elderly mother saying her final goodbye was a scene too private, too painful to watch closely. Carefully, I slid my fingers under Danielle's hand. The object was small, hard, rectangular. I pulled it out with a movement I hoped looked like part of my farewell gesture and tucked it into my closed fist before pulling back. My heart was beating wildly as I straightened up. I shoved my hand into the pocket of my black coat and dropped the object inside, not looking at it yet. I couldn't risk anyone seeing what I had found. But even without looking, I could feel its shape against my palm. A USB flash drive. Small, thin, the kind Danielle always carried for work. Why would there be a flash drive hidden under my dead daughter's hand? Who had put it there, and what did it contain that was important enough to be hidden in such a macabre place? The answers to those questions would have to wait because at that moment, Lawrence approached me again, this time with a more serious, definitive expression. "Lucille," he said, and there was something in his tone that put me on immediate alert. "We need to talk about Danielle's arrangements, about her financial affairs." Danielle's financial affairs. The words floated in the air between us like a barely veiled threat. Lawrence looked at me with an expression that tried to be compassionate but failed to hide something darker underneath. Expectation, perhaps. Or impatience. "Now?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "At her funeral?" "I know the timing isn't ideal," he replied, lowering his voice as if sharing something confidential. "But there are things that must be resolved soon. Bank accounts, properties, the company. Danielle was a very successful woman, as you know, and she left. She left a lot of things that need immediate attention." The way he said a lot of things made me feel like he was appraising cattle at a market, as if my daughter were just a collection of assets waiting to be liquidated and distributed. The flash drive in my pocket seemed to burn through the fabric of my coat, a small weight that suddenly felt tremendously important. "I'm sure it can wait until after the burial," I said, keeping my tone neutral, though every instinct in my body screamed at me not to give this man an inch. "Danielle deserves for us to focus on saying goodbye properly before thinking about material matters." A muscle in Lawrence's jaw twitched. Just for a second, but I saw it. "Of course," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're right. Forgive me. The stress is making me forget what's appropriate." He paused, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "I just wanted you to know that as her husband, naturally, I'll be the executor of her estate. It's the legal process, the right thing." There was the real reason behind his rush. It wasn't concern for resolving pending matters. It was ensuring I understood that he controlled everything now. That Danielle's money, the money she had earned with her intelligence and tireless work, now belonged to him. "I understand," I lied, because there was no sense in revealing my suspicions yet. Not when I didn't even know exactly what I was suspecting. I just knew something was terribly wrong, and I needed time to find out what. Lawrence seemed satisfied with my answer. He gave me another one of those shoulder squeezes that now felt unbearable and walked away toward where Paula was waiting, pretending to study one of the flower wreaths. I saw them exchange another one of those loaded looks before he turned his attention to other guests. The rest of the night dissolved into a haze of goodbyes and empty promises to stay in touch. One by one, the attendees left until only Lawrence, myself, and the funeral home staff remained, preparing everything for the burial the next day. "Do you want me to drive you home?" Lawrence offered. But there was something mechanical in the offer, as if he were fulfilling a social obligation rather than expressing a genuine desire to care for me. "No, thank you," I replied. "Doris offered to drive me. She's waiting outside." It was a lie. Doris had left an hour ago, but I didn't want to be alone with Lawrence. I didn't want to sit in a closed car with him, breathing the same air, pretending everything was normal when every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. If Lawrence suspected my lie, he didn't show it. "As you wish," he said with a shrug. "I'll see you tomorrow then, at the cemetery." I nodded and watched him leave. He moved with too much lightness for a man destroyed by loss. His steps were firm, decisive, almost cheerful. I saw him pull out his phone even before reaching the door, his fingers already sliding over the screen with familiarity. I waited until his figure disappeared into the night before moving. I called a taxi from the funeral home's landline and sat in one of the velvet armchairs in the lobby, my hand closing around the flash drive in my pocket as if it were a talisman. The ride home was silent. The driver didn't try to make conversation. Thank God. I needed the silence, needed space to think, to process everything I had seen and heard during those endless hours. My apartment received me with its comforting familiarity, but also with a new, painful emptiness. This was the place where Danielle had grown up, where she had taken her first steps, where she had studied late into the night to get the scholarships that would change her life. The walls still held photos of her at every stage of her existence. A little girl with braids, a teenager smiling with her diploma, a beautiful woman on her wedding day. I stopped in front of that last photo, Danielle looked radiant in her white dress, her smile lighting up the whole image. And next to her, Lawrence, handsome and seemingly in love, looking at her with what I then interpreted as adoration. Now, studying the photo with new eyes, I wondered if I had been blind all that time. How had I confused ambition with love, greed with devotion? I looked away from the photo and went straight to my bedroom. I locked the door, even though I lived alone, a precaution my rational mind knew was unnecessary, but my instinct demanded. I took the flash drive out of my pocket and held it under the light of my bedside lamp. It was black, small, no bigger than my thumb. It had no distinctive markings, no label indicating its contents. But it had been hidden under my dead daughter's hand, placed there by someone who knew I would find it. Because who else would lean over Danielle in that last moment? Who else would touch her cold face in a gesture of farewell? Danielle had wanted me to find this. My computer was old, a bulky desktop I'd had for years, but it worked. I turned it on with trembling hands and waited what felt like an eternity while the system booted up. When it was finally ready, I inserted the flash drive carefully, as if the device might explode if I handled it roughly. The screen flickered. A folder appeared. Inside were files, many files, documents, audio recordings, photographs. The titles were cryptic, but organized. Accounts. Discrepancies. Recorded conversations. Evidence transfers. Photos proof. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I opened the first file, a simple text document. "Mom," it began. I had to blink several times to clear the tears clouding my vision. It was Danielle's voice, translated into words on a page. "If you are reading this, it means what I feared would happen has happened. It means I wasn't fast enough, or careful enough, or I simply underestimated how far they were willing to go. They, plural. I have been gathering evidence for the last 6 months," the document continued. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, that love had made me suspicious for no reason. But then I started noticing things. Small things that didn't add up. Money disappearing from secondary accounts, passwords changed, documents moved in my office, and Lawrence, who suddenly became very interested in my life insurance policies, in my will, in exactly how much my company was worth. My hands shook so much I could barely hold the mouse to keep reading. I discovered he has a mistress. Her name is Paula. He met her 2 years ago at a business conference. At first, I thought it was just an affair, something painful but survivable. I was willing to try to save our marriage. But then I found the messages between them. And they weren't just talking about love, Mom. They were talking about money. My money. How to get it. How to make it look like an accident. The room began to spin. I forced myself to keep reading, though every word was like a knife in the chest. There is more. Much more. Recordings of their phone calls, records of transfers Lawrence made to ghost accounts, emails between him and Paula planning my death as if they were organizing a vacation. I have documented everything. Every conversation, every suspicious transaction, every lie. The document went on to detail a meticulous plan of evidence gathering. Danielle had been so careful, so methodical. She had hired a private investigator without Lawrence knowing. She had installed monitoring software on his phone. She had created backups of financial documents and stored them in multiple locations. "I planned to confront him," she wrote. "I was going to ask for a divorce and turn him over to the authorities for fraud and conspiracy. I had a meeting scheduled with my lawyer, Charles Montgomery, for next week. But Mom, if you are reading this, it means I didn't make it to that meeting. It means they were faster. Faster. The accident, the skid on the wet highway, the sharp turn that sent Danielle's Tesla off a cliff. It hadn't been an accident at all. I have left instructions with Charles," the document continued. "He has copies of all this too, but I needed you to know the truth. I needed you not to believe that I simply left you. Not to think I was careless or foolish. I was murdered, Mom. By the man who promised to love me. By the man we trusted." The words on the screen blurred not from tears this time, but from a rage so pure, so absolute, that I felt my entire body vibrating with it. My daughter had been murdered. It hadn't been a tragic accident. It hadn't been cruel fate. It hadn't been bad luck on a rain-slicked road. It had been a calculated plan, executed by the man who slept beside her every night. The man who kissed her forehead every morning. the man who had promised to love her until death did them part. And death had parted them, but not in the way those sacred vows intended. I kept reading. Even though every word was like swallowing glass, Danielle had documented everything with a precision that broke my heart. Dates, times, specific conversations. There were screenshots of text messages between Lawrence and Paula where they discussed how much money was in Danielle's offshore accounts. Emails where they planned their future together, a future funded by my daughter's death. In one of the messages, Paula wrote, "Are you sure it will work? We can't risk it," looking suspicious. And Lawrence replied, "Brakes fail all the time, especially on curvy roads. No one is going to question an accident on Route 9. It's known for being dangerous." Danielle's car wasn't old. It was barely 2 years old, and she was an exceptional driver, careful to the extreme. But sabotaged brakes don't respect the driver's skill. There were audio files. I opened them one by one, forcing myself to listen, though every word was torture. Lawrence's voice, recorded without his knowledge, discussing details with Paula. "She has a life insurance policy for $2 million, he said in one recording. "And the company is worth at least $10 million more. It all passes to me automatically as her husband. We just need to be patient and make sure it looks natural." "What about the old woman?" Paula asked, and it took a second for me to realize she was referring to me. "She won't ask questions. Lucille is harmless," Lawrence replied with a tone of disdain that made me clench my fists. "She's just an old lady. She has no idea how business or money works. Danielle always kept her away from those things. She'll be easy to handle." An harmless old lady, that's what they thought of me. An insignificant piece on their chessboard. Too stupid or too weak to pose a threat. Underestimating me would be their mistake. I continued exploring the files for hours. There were bank records showing irregular transfers. Lawrence had been embezzling from Danielle's business accounts for over a year, small amounts at first, small enough not to raise immediate alarms. But as time went on, the amounts grew. $50,000 here, $100,000 there. By the time Danielle started noticing the discrepancies, over $500,000 had vanished. When she confronted him, he denied it. He told her she must be mistaken, that she had probably forgotten some legitimate transfers. He made her doubt her own memory, her own competence. Gaslighting, they call it now. A form of psychological abuse designed to make the victim question their sanity. But Danielle was too smart for that. Instead of continuing to confront him, she began her silent investigation, hired the PI, installed the spyware, methodically gathered evidence, building a case that would be irrefutable. And when she had enough, when she was finally ready to act, they killed her. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I had been reading for nearly 5 hours, and I still hadn't finished reviewing all the files. But I had seen enough to understand the magnitude of what Danielle had discovered. This wasn't just a failed marriage or a painful infidelity. It was fraud, conspiracy, and premeditated murder. I closed the computer and lay back on the bed, but sleep was impossible. My mind ran in circles, processing everything I had learned, trying to decide what to do next. Danielle had mentioned a lawyer, Charles Montgomery. I needed to find him. I needed to know if he truly had copies of all this evidence as she had written. But there was a problem. Lawrence had said he would handle all of Danielle's affairs as her husband. That meant he had probably already started contacting her lawyers, her accountants, everyone who handled her finances. If Charles Montgomery tried to reveal what he knew, Lawrence would find a way to silence him, to discredit him, to make him look like a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to move carefully. Morning came too soon. I hadn't slept a minute, but I got up anyway and prepared for the burial. I put on the same black dress from the day before, brushed my gray hair, which suddenly looked whiter than ever, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was 70 years old and looked like she had aged a decade in one night. But her eyes, my eyes, burned with something that hadn't been there before. Determination. Contained fury. Purpose. The cemetery was beautiful in that way only cemeteries can be. The sun shone through the ancient oak trees, dappling the manicured green lawn with light and shadow. It was a picture-perfect American resting place. There were fewer people than at the wake. Only the closest ones, those who really wanted to be there for the final goodbye. Doris was present, standing near the back in her gray coat, looking solemn, some of Danielle's business partners, a few college friends, and, of course, Lawrence and Paula. She had the audacity to show up. She wore a conservative black suit this time, her hair pulled back in a low bun, eyes hidden behind dark designer sunglasses. She kept a prudent distance from Lawrence, but I could see the way their bodies oriented toward each other like magnets, even as they pretended to be strangers. The service was brief. The priest spoke of eternal life and the comfort of knowing Danielle was in a better place. I barely heard the words. I was too busy watching Lawrence drop a white rose onto the casket, a gesture that looked ripped from a movie. Watching Paula dab at tears I was sure were fake. Watching how they both exchanged quick glances when they thought no one was paying attention. And then I saw something that froze my blood. When the casket was being lowered into the ground, while we all looked down with somber expressions, I saw Lawrence pull out his phone. He didn't look at it openly. He held it low, near his thigh, but his thumbs moved over the screen, typing something fast. Seconds later, Paula reached into her purse and pulled out her own phone. She checked it with a discreet movement, and I saw her lips curve into a small smile before she remembered where she was and recomposed her expression. They were texting each other at my daughter's burial while her body descended into the earth. The disrespect, the sheer cruelty of it, almost made me scream. But I swallowed the rage. I stored it, turned it into something cold and hard inside my chest, something I could use later. When the ceremony ended, people began to disperse. Lawrence approached me, his mask of grief firmly in place. "Lucille," he said, taking my hands in his. His palms were warm, almost clammy. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I want you to know I'm going to take care of you." Danielle would have wanted that. Again, using my daughter to manipulate me, as if she would have wanted me to be taken care of by her murderer. "Thank you, Lawrence," I said, keeping my voice soft, playing the role he expected of me. "You're very kind." "Actually," he continued, and I could see the calculation in his eyes, "we need to meet soon to discuss some matters. There are documents that need your signature. Nothing urgent, but it would be good to settle it while everything is fresh." Documents that needed my signature. I wondered what kind of documents those would be. Waivers of any claim to Danielle's estate? Declarations that I was satisfied with how he was handling things? Papers that would make me an unknowing accomplice to his theft? "Of course," I said. "When you're ready, let me know." He seemed satisfied with my cooperation. "Perfect. I'll call you in a few days, once I have everything organized." He gave me a kiss on the cheek that I had to force myself not to recoil from. "Take care, Lucille." I watched him walk away, and then I saw him meet Paula near the cemetery exit. They didn't touch, didn't hug, but they walked toward the parking lot with a synchronization that revealed practice. They would probably meet later in some private place to celebrate that everything had gone according to plan. Except it hadn't gone according to plan, because Danielle had left the truth for me to find. And now I knew exactly who they were and what they had done. "Mrs. Mason?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a man of about 50, gray hair at the temples, impeccable suit, leather briefcase in hand. "I am so sorry for your loss. My name is Charles Montgomery. I was Danielle's attorney. The lawyer. The man Danielle had mentioned in her document. The one who supposedly had copies of all the evidence." My heart leaped in my chest. Charles Montgomery, here he was, showing up at the exact moment I needed him most, as if the universe had finally decided to be on my side. But something in his expression warned me to be careful. His eyes darted quickly around the cemetery, checking who was close enough to hear. "Mr. Montgomery," I said, keeping my voice low, "Danielle told me about you." Something crossed his face, a flash of relief mixed with sadness. "She did?" he asked. And there was a weight to those two words that confirmed he knew. He knew everything. "Then I imagine you are aware of certain circumstances." "I found what she left for me," I replied, choosing my words carefully. There were still people scattered around the cemetery, and I couldn't risk anyone overhearing. "The flash drive?" Charles nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Good. That's good. It means you're prepared for what comes next." He looked over my shoulder toward where Lawrence had been standing moments before. "Have you spoken to him?" "To Lawrence? He wants us to meet soon. Says there are documents that need my signature." An expression of disgust crossed Charles's face. "I'm sure he does. Mrs. Mason, I need you to be very careful. Do not sign anything he presents to you." Nothing. Even if it looks harmless, especially if it looks harmless. He lowered his voice even further. Danielle came to see me 3 weeks before her death. She gave me copies of everything, the bank records, the recordings, everything. We were preparing a legal strategy. She was going to file charges for fraud and then proceed with the divorce. Why didn't she go to the police immediately? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because Lawrence is smart, Charles replied bitterly. He had covered his tracks carefully. The transfers looked legitimate on paper. We needed time to build an irrefutable case to demonstrate the pattern of behavior. And Danielle, he paused, his voice breaking slightly. Danielle wanted to be sure. She didn't want to give him any chance to escape or destroy evidence. So she had been patient, methodical. She had planned every step, but they had been faster, more ruthless. They had seen she was digging and acted before she could expose their crimes. "Do you still have the copies?" I asked. "The evidence Danielle gave you?" "In my office, in a safe," Charles confirmed, "and also in a bank vault as a backup." Danielle was very specific about the precautions we needed to take. He closed his eyes for a moment. "She told me that if anything happened to her, if there was an accident of any kind, that I shouldn't believe it was a coincidence. That I should take everything to the authorities immediately." "And will you?" My voice sounded more desperate than I intended. "Will you take the evidence to the police?" Charles hesitated, and in that moment of doubt, I saw the complexity of the problem. "Legally, it's complicated," he admitted. "Lawrence is the widower. He has rights to Danielle's estate as her husband. And the accident, well, it was investigated. The police concluded it was exactly that, an accident. Brakes failed. Car went off the road. No witnesses. No physical evidence at the scene to suggest sabotage. So they're not going to do anything?" The despair in my voice was now impossible to hide. "They're going to let him get away with murder?" "I didn't say that," Charles said firmly. "But we need to be strategic. If I go now with accusations of murder based on ambiguous conversation recordings and financial records, Lawrence will hire the best legal team money can buy Danielle's money, ironically, and they will find ways to discredit everything. They'll say Danielle was paranoid, that the recordings are out of context, that the financial discrepancies have legitimate explanations." He was right, and it infuriated me. Justice wasn't just about knowing the truth, it was about proving it in a way the legal system accepted. "What do you suggest then?" I asked, feeling the weight of my age for the first time in this conversation. 70 years old, and suddenly I found myself navigating a world of criminal conspiracies and legal battles I wasn't prepared for. "We need more," Charles said. "We need Lawrence to expose himself, to make a mistake, to reveal something that definitively connects the car sabotage to him." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. "If Lawrence says or does anything suspicious, document everything." I took the card, feeling its weight in my hand as if it were something much heavier than a simple rectangle of paper. "And if he tries to hurt me too? If he decided I'm a threat?" "He won't," Charles interrupted, though he didn't sound completely convinced. "You are his mother-in-law. Killing you so soon after Danielle's death would raise too many suspicions. He's too smart for that." He paused. "But still, be careful. Don't stay alone with him if you can avoid it, and don't accept food or drink he offers you." The words were like something out of a thriller movie, but this was my life now. This was the reality I lived in. Charles said goodbye after assuring me we would be in touch. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing among the headstones and trees, leaving me with the only sense of relief I had felt since finding the flash drive. "Mrs. Mason?" Another voice, this time female and familiar. I turned to find Doris approaching, her face wrinkled with worry. "Are you okay?" "You look pale." "I'm fine, Doris," I lied. What else could I say? That I had just discovered my daughter was murdered and was conspiring with her lawyer to trap the culprits? It's just all of this. It's a lot. Doris took my arm with a gentleness that almost made me cry. "I know, honey. Come on, let me drive you home. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this." I accepted her offer, grateful for the company, though I knew I would eventually have to be alone to process everything. During the ride to my apartment, Doris talked about trivial things, filling the silence with neighborhood gossip and comments about the weather. I nodded at the appropriate times, but my mind was miles away. When we arrived at my building, Doris insisted on coming up with me. "Just to make sure you're settled," she said, and I didn't have the energy to argue. We climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, every step feeling like a mountain under my tired feet. But when we reached my door, I stopped dead. Something was wrong. The door was closed, the lock intact, but there was something different, a feeling in the air, a subtle shift that only someone who has lived in the same place for decades could detect. "What's wrong?" Doris asked, noticing my hesitation. "Nothing," I said, because I didn't want to alarm her. "I'm just tired." I took out my keys with slightly trembling hands and opened the door. Everything seemed to be in its place, furniture where I left it, photos on the walls, curtains still open as I left them that morning. But there was a different smell in the air, perhaps. Or the sensation that someone had been there, breathing the same air, touching my things. Doris didn't notice anything strange. She helped me take off my coat, insisted on making me a cup of tea, and stayed chatting for half an hour before finally saying goodbye. "Call me if you need anything," she said at the door. "Anything at all, no matter the time." I thanked her and locked the door behind her, sliding the deadbolt and the security chain. Then I stood in the middle of my living room, listening. The apartment was silent except for the usual sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant murmur of traffic on the street. I moved slowly through every room, looking for any sign that someone had been there. In the kitchen, everything looked normal. In the bathroom, the same. But when I reached my bedroom, I saw it. The computer monitor was at a slightly different angle than I had left it. Just an inch or two, but enough for me to notice. And the drawer of my nightstand, the one I always kept completely shut, was ajar by barely a millimeter. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been looking for something. With my heart beating wildly, I rushed to my computer and turned it on. My clumsy fingers struggled with the mouse as I looked for the flash drive. It was there, thank God, still inserted in the port where I had left it. But when I opened the file properties, I saw something that chilled my blood. Last accessed. Today, 11:45 a.m. While I was at the funeral. While I was burying my daughter. Someone had opened these files. Someone had read Danielle's document, had listened to the recordings, had seen all the evidence. Lawrence knew. He knew that I knew. And if he knew, then I was no longer a harmless old lady who could be ignored. Now I was a threat, a witness, an obstacle that needed to be removed. My phone rang, shattering the deafening silence. I jumped, my hand flying to my chest where my heart was beating like a drum. I looked at the screen with shaking hands. Unknown caller. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello? Lucille." Lawrence's voice. Smooth, friendly, too friendly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "I know it's been an exhausting day, Lawrence," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you need?" "I just wanted to check that you got home safely. I worry about you, you know? Your family." He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something different in his tone, something darker. "I also wanted to tell you I've expedited that meeting I mentioned. How does tomorrow look? I could stop by your apartment, that way you don't have to travel." He wanted to come to my apartment. He wanted to be alone with me in my own space. "Tomorrow is too soon," I said, forcing my voice to sound weak, tired. "I'm still processing everything. We could leave it for next week." There was a silence on the line. A silence that stretched too long, loaded with something I couldn't completely identify but that put my nerves on edge. "Of course," Lawrence finally said, though I could detect the tension under his words. "I understand perfectly. You've been through a lot. Rest, and we'll talk next week." Another pause. "Take care, Lucille. The world can be dangerous for someone of your age living alone." The barely veiled threat hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't my words that had alerted him. It was the fact that he had entered my apartment. He had seen that I found the flash drive. He had checked the files. Now he knew that I knew the truth, and he was letting me know that he knew. "Good night, Lawrence," I said, and hung up before he could respond. My hands shook as I lowered the phone. The room suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The windows facing the street looked like watching eyes. Shadows in the corners hid imaginary threats, or perhaps not so imaginary. I needed to think. I needed a plan. Lawrence had accelerated his timeline now that he knew I had evidence. He wouldn't simply wait patiently for me to make a mistake, as Charles had suggested. I needed to be proactive. I took out the card Charles had given me and dialed the private number on the back. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Mason?" Charles said, his voice immediately alert. "What happened?" I told him everything about the feeling someone had been in my apartment, about the files that had been accessed, about Lawrence's call with his thinly disguised threat. "Damn it," Charles muttered. "He's bolder than I thought. Listen, you can't stay there. Not tonight. Do you have somewhere to go? A relative? A friend?" "Doris," I said immediately. "My neighbor. Can I stay with her?" "Good. Go now. Don't pack much. I don't want him to suspect you're fleeing. Just take the essentials and the flash drive. Tomorrow morning we'll meet at my office and decide the next steps." I followed his instructions to the letter. I threw a few things into a small bag clothes for a couple of days. My medications, important documents, and the flash drive, which I tucked into the innermost zipper pocket of my purse where it would be safe. Before leaving, I looked one last time around my apartment. This had been my home for almost 40 years. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every object had a story. And now I had to leave it behind because the man who had sworn to protect my daughter had turned into my hunter. The walk to Doris's house was short, just 3 houses down the street. I knocked on her door with urgency, looking over my shoulder at the shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Doris opened up with a worried expression. "Lucille? What's wrong?" "I need to stay with you tonight," I said without preamble. "Please. I can't explain everything now, but I need your help." She asked no questions. She just opened the door wider and let me in. "Of course, dear. You're always welcome here." That night I slept in Doris's guest room, but sleep was elusive and plagued by nightmares. I saw Danielle falling off a cliff in a car with no brakes. I saw Lawrence standing over her grave, smiling. I saw Paula counting blood-stained $100 bills. By 6 a.m., I was already awake, unable to stay in bed a minute longer. Doris made coffee and toast, and though my stomach protested, I forced myself to eat. I needed to keep my strength up. At 8 sharp, a rideshare picked me up at Doris's house. I gave the address of Charles's office and watched out the window as the city woke up around me. Ordinary people going to ordinary jobs, living ordinary lives. No one knew that among them traveled a 70-year-old woman on her way to plan how to catch her daughter's killer. Charles's office was in a sleek glass building downtown. His receptionist ushered me immediately into his private office, a room lined with law books and windows overlooking the skyline. Charles was waiting, and he wasn't alone. There was a man with him, about 40, with short hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore jeans and a casual shirt, nothing like Charles's formal suit. "Mrs. Mason," Charles said, rising to greet me. "This is Mark Russo. He's the private investigator Danielle hired. He's been working on the case since the beginning." Mark extended his hand. "I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances," he said. "Danielle talked about you a lot. She loved you deeply." The words pierced me, opening the wound I had been trying to keep closed. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Mark has additional info," Charles continued. "Things he's uncovered since Danielle's death. I think you should hear them." Mark opened a folder on the desk. It contained photographs. "I've been watching Lawrence and Paula," he explained. "After Danielle's death, I figured if they were really involved, they wouldn't be able to resist celebrating." He slid a photograph toward me. It was Lawrence and Paula at a high-end steakhouse, clinking champagne flutes. The date stamp in the corner said it was taken 2 days after the funeral. I stared at the photo, my hands shaking. There they were, Lawrence and Paula, smiling, as if they didn't have a care in the world, as if they hadn't murdered someone just days before. The champagne sparkled in their glasses, likely expensive, likely paid for with the money Lawrence had already started stealing from Danielle's accounts. "There's more," Mark said, sliding another set of photos. Lawrence and Paula leaving a luxury apartment building together, Lawrence handing Paula a thick envelope. Paula trying on diamond jewelry in an exclusive boutique while Lawrence watched with an indulgent smile. They've been pretty sloppy, considering they just committed murder. I guess they thought they won. "How long have they been together?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow. "According to my records, at least 2.5 years, Mark replied. "But I suspect it could be longer. Danielle started suspecting 6 months ago, but the trails suggest the relationship is older, 2.5 years. While Danielle worked tirelessly building her company, while she trusted the man who shared her bed, he was betraying her in every possible way, with another woman, with her money, and finally, with her life. Charles leaned forward. Mark also investigated the accident. He hired an independent mechanic to examine the vehicle wreckage before it was scrapped. Mark pulled out another document, this one with technical photos of car parts. The brake lines were cut, he explained, pointing to a specific area in the images. It wasn't natural wear and tear. Someone nicked them partially just enough so they would fail after a certain amount of pressure. It's a classic method because it looks like a mechanical failure unless you know exactly what to look for. Did you show this to the police? I asked, feeling a spark of hope. I tried, Mark said with frustration. But the case was already closed. They told me without evidence directly connecting a specific person to the sabotage, without witnesses, without fingerprints on the greasy parts, they can't reopen the investigation based just on speculation that the lines were cut intentionally. The hope faded as quickly as it had arrived. So we have evidence of fraud, of an affair, of motive, of mechanical sabotage, and it's still not enough? The problem is connecting all the dots in a way a district attorney considers a slam-dunk case, Charles explained. Lawrence has resources now. Danielle's money gives him access to top-tier defense lawyers. They can argue the fraud was a misunderstanding, the affair doesn't prove murder, the mechanical sabotage could have been done by anyone. So what do we do? The desperation in my voice was palpable. We just let him get away with it? No, Charles said firmly. But we need him to incriminate himself. We need a confession, or at least we need him to do something undeniably criminal that we can document. Mark nodded. That's why I think we should set a trap. We spent the next few hours planning. Mark had experience in undercover ops from his days as an NYPD detective before going private. He explained that the best way to make someone like Lawrence expose himself was to make him feel pressured, threaten to make him act impulsively, instead of with the cold calculation he had shown so far. He already knows you have the flash drive, Mark said. That makes him nervous. Now we need to dial up that pressure, make him think he's about to lose everything. How? I asked. You're going to confront him, Charles replied. But not directly. You're going to let him know you have evidence, that you're considering going to the police, but that you want to give him a chance to explain first. As if you still have doubts. As if you could be convinced. And he's going to believe that? Arrogance is the Achilles heel of men like Lawrence, Mark explained. He's spent years underestimating you, viewing you as a powerless old lady. His ego will make him believe he can manipulate you, talk you down, or in the worst case threaten you into silence. And when he does, Charles continued, when he reveals information only the killer would know, or when he makes explicit threats, we'll have it recorded. They showed me a small device, no bigger than a button. It's a wire, Mark explained. High-quality audio. You'll wear it during the meeting with Lawrence. It'll catch everything he says. The idea of facing Lawrence, knowing what he had done, knowing what he was capable of, terrified me. But it also filled me with a fierce determination. Danielle had been brave. She had faced her fear, gathered evidence against a man who would eventually kill her. The least I could do was honor her courage with my own. I'll do it, I said. We spent the rest of the day prepping. Mark taught me how to use the recorder, how to position myself to capture the best audio, what kind of questions to ask to provoke incriminating answers. Charles reviewed the legal aspects, ensuring I understood that any evidence obtained needed to be legal to be admissible in court. Don't accuse him directly of murder, Charles warned. That will put him on the defensive immediately, and he'll shut down. Instead, talk about the financial discrepancies Danielle discovered. About Paula. Make him explain things that have no innocent explanation. Let him dig his own grave with his words. When I finally left Charles's office, it was getting dark. Mark insisted on driving me back to Doris's house in his own car, constantly checking the rearview mirror to make sure we weren't being followed. Lawrence is desperate now, he reminded me as we approached the cul-de-sac. Desperate men do unpredictable things. Don't let your guard down for a second. I nodded, feeling the weight of the small recorder in my pocket as a constant reminder of what was to come. That night, from Doris's landline, I called Lawrence. My heart beat so hard I was sure he could hear it through the line. "Lawrence?" I said when he answered. "It's Lucille. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I think we need to talk in person." There was a pause, and I could hear the calculation in his silence. "Of course," he finally said, his voice smooth, controlled. "When is good for you?" "Tomorrow afternoon. There's a coffee shop near Central Park, the one on 72nd. You know it. Can you be there at 3? A public place with witnesses." Mark and Charles had insisted on that. Lawrence wouldn't try anything physical with people around. "I'll be there," Lawrence promised. "Lucille, I'm glad you want to talk. I know things have been complicated, but we're family. We can resolve any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. As if the murder of my daughter was simply a communication error that could be cleared up with a friendly chat. I hung up and looked at Doris, who had been listening from her armchair, her face pale with worry. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "But it's what I have to do." The coffee shop was buzzing with activity when I arrived at 2:45 p.m. Students with laptops, couples chatting over lattes, tourists taking breaks. Normal life unfolding around me while I prepared to confront my daughter's killer. Mark was already there, sitting at a table near the window, pretending to read a newspaper. Charles had wanted to come too, but we decided his presence would be too risky. Mark, with his casual look, could pass for just another customer. Our eyes met briefly, and he nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming he was ready. I sat at a table in the center of the room where surrounding conversations would provide background noise but wouldn't interfere with the recorder. I touched the small device taped under my blouse, making sure it was secure. Mark had rigged it up before I left his car. At 3 sharp, Lawrence walked in. He wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, a calculatedly casual outfit that made him look relaxed, approachable. His face lit up with a smile when he saw me, and he approached with confident strides. "Lucille," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His expensive cologne washed over me, a scent that had once seemed pleasant but now made my stomach turn. "Good to see you. Did you order anything yet?" "Just water," I replied. "I don't have much of an appetite lately." His expression softened into something that was supposed to be compassion. "I understand. I haven't been able to eat well either since everything happened." He sat opposite me, his hands resting on the table in an open, non-threatening posture. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath, remembering Charles's instructions. "Don't accuse, just ask. Let him incriminate himself." "I found some of Danielle's things," I began, keeping my voice shaky, acting unsure. "Documents, records. And there are things I don't understand, Lawrence. Things that worry me." Something crossed his face too fast to identify completely, but it was there. Alertness, tension. "What kind of things?" he asked, his tone still calm but with a new edge. "Money missing from her business accounts," I said. "Transfers she didn't authorize. And there are notes where she mentions she was worried, that she thought someone was stealing from her." Lawrence leaned back in his chair. His posture was still relaxed, but his eyes were now focused, calculating. "Ah, that," he said, as if it were trivial. "Danielle sometimes got confused with her finances. She had so many accounts, so many moving parts. She probably just lost track of some transactions." $500,000, Lawrence. I let the words hang in the air. "That's not the kind of amount someone simply forgets." I saw his jaw tighten. "I don't know where you're getting that figure, Lucille, but I assure you, if there were any discrepancies, there's a completely legitimate explanation. I handled some of Danielle's investments. Everything was documented. Everything was legal." "Then why didn't she know?" I pressed. "Why did she write that she was being robbed?" "Because," Lawrence said, and for the first time I detected irritation in his voice, "your daughter, God rest her soul, was brilliant at many things, but paranoia was her weakness. Always thinking someone was trying to take advantage of her. Probably because of how she grew up. Without money, having to fight for everything. It was a barely veiled insult toward me, toward the life I had given Danielle. There are also photographs," I continued, ignoring his jab. "Of you with a woman, Paula." There was that flash in his eyes again, but this time he didn't try to hide it completely. "Paula is a business colleague," he said firmly. "We met at a conference years ago. Sometimes we have lunch to discuss investments. There is nothing inappropriate about that." Danielle thought differently. I kept my gaze fixed on his. "She thought you two were planning something related to her money." Lawrence's mask began to crack. His smile tightened, becoming more of a grimace. "Lucille, with all due respect, I think you are allowing your grief to make you see things that don't exist." Danielle was stressed. Her business was under a lot of pressure. Sometimes, when people are under stress, they see conspiracies where there are none. "So her death was convenient for you." The words came out before I could stop them, more direct than Charles had advised. Lawrence went very still. "What are you implying?" "That now all her money is yours, her company, her properties, everything. I am her widower," he said with a controlled voice. But I could see the tension in his neck, the way his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Legally, everything passes to me. That's normal. That's how marriage works. Except she was going to divorce you. I said it as a fact, not a question." Lawrence leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. "Who is putting these ideas in your head, Lucille? Is it that lawyer, Charles Montgomery? Because if so, you should know he has his own motives." Danielle was considering firing him. He was about to lose his most lucrative client. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But it was interesting to see him try to plant doubts, create alternative narratives. "Danielle left me evidence," I said quietly. "A flash drive with everything. The transfers, the recordings of your conversations with Paula, everything." The color drained from his face. For a full moment, he said nothing. He just looked at me, and I could see his mind working furiously, trying to calculate how much I really knew, how much evidence existed, how big a threat I represented. "That's impossible," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Danielle, no. She had no reason to record me. Except that you and Paula were planning to kill her." I said it calmly, as if discussing the weather. "You talked about sabotaging her car, about making it look like an accident, about splitting her money." Lawrence stood up so abruptly his chair tipped backward with a crash that made several people in the coffee shop turn and look. He leaned over the table, his face now a mask of barely contained fury. "Listen to me well, old woman," he hissed in a low, venomous voice. "I don't know what you think you know, but you are playing a very dangerous game. Danielle died in an accident. Tragic, yes, but an accident. And if you start spreading lies, making baseless accusations, you're going to run into problems your senile brain can't even imagine." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm warning you." He straightened up, adjusting his sweater with jerky movements. "You are an elderly woman, Lucille. Vulnerable. You live alone. Accidents happen. Falls in the shower. Robberies gone wrong. It would be terrible if something happened to you right after losing your daughter." There it was. The explicit threat we needed. I saw it in his eyes, the realization that he had gone too far, but it was too late. The words had left his mouth and were recorded on the device under my blouse. "I'm leaving now," Lawrence said, his voice regaining some control, though his hands still trembled slightly. "And I suggest you forget any absurd ideas you have in your head, for your own good." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop with quick, rigid steps. Through the window, I watched him cross the street and disappear into the crowd. Only then did I allow myself to exhale the air I had been holding. Mark appeared at my side seconds later. "You did it perfectly," he murmured. "We got everything." The threat was clear and unequivocal. My hands were shaking as he helped me stand up. "Now what?" I asked. "Now we go to Charles." And then straight to the police. The next few hours were a whirlwind. At Charles's office, we listened to the recording 3 times, making sure every word was clear. Lawrence's voice threatening me with accidents, with falls, with robberies. It was undeniable. It was incriminating. Charles called a contact at the district attorney's office, someone he knew personally and trusted. By evening, we were sitting in a government office, playing the recording for a stern-faced assistant DA named Angelo Vargas. "This is a clear threat," Angelo said after listening, "combined with the evidence of fraud and the suspicious circumstances of Danielle Mason's death." He paused, flipping through the documents Mark and Charles had compiled. "I think we have enough to get an arrest warrant and launch a full investigation." "How long will it take?" I asked, my voice small in that office filled with law books and unsolved cases. "We can have the warrant by tomorrow morning," Angelo replied. "But Mrs. Mason, I need you to understand this is going to be a long process. Lawrence Sterling is going to hire the best lawyers money can buy. He's going to fight." "Let him fight," I said, and the fierceness in my own voice surprised me. Danielle fought. She gathered evidence knowing it might cost her her life. The least I can do is ensure her death wasn't in vain. That night, I slept at Doris's house again, but this time, sleep came easier. I knew it wasn't over, that the road ahead would be hard. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt like Danielle could rest a little easier. The next morning, Mark called me early. "They just arrested Lawrence," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Picked him up at his apartment an hour ago." They also arrested Paula. She's singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal to reduce her time. The following months were exactly as hard as Angelo had warned. Lawrence hired a formidable legal team. He denied everything, claimed the recordings were out of context, that his words had been misinterpreted, that he never threatened anyone. But Paula, faced with solid evidence and the possibility of life in prison, cracked. She confessed everything. How Lawrence had convinced her they deserved Danielle's money more than she did. How they had planned the car sabotage for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. How Lawrence had nicked the brake lines the night before the crash, knowing Danielle had to drive that winding highway to a business meeting the next day. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I was there every single day, sitting in the front row, forcing Lawrence to look at me every time he turned toward the gallery. I wanted him to remember that the harmless old lady he had underestimated was the reason he was now sitting at the defendant's table. When the verdict came down, guilty of first-degree murder, fraud, and conspiracy, I didn't feel triumph. Just a deep exhaustion and an equally deep relief. Lawrence was sentenced to life without parole. Paula got 25 years for her cooperation. Danielle's money, everything Lawrence had stolen, and more was recovered. As her sole legitimate heir, now that the marriage was annulled due to the criminal circumstances, everything passed to me. It was more money than I could ever spend in whatever life I had left. 6 months after the trial, I launched the Danielle Mason Foundation for victims of domestic financial abuse. I committed $10 million of seed money to provide legal resources, shelter, and support to women trapped in relationships where their lives or finances were endangered. I hired Charles as the head legal counsel. Mark headed up investigations for complex cases. On the first anniversary of Danielle's death, I visited her grave with fresh flowers. The marble headstone shone in the sun with her name engraved in elegant letters. Danielle Mason, beloved daughter, visionary, fighter. "We did it, my love," I whispered, kneeling by the grave. "We got you justice, and your legacy is going to help other women escape before it's too late." The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees, and for a moment I could almost hear Danielle's laugh. Not the impossible giggle from the wake, but her real laugh full of joy and life. I stayed there a long time, sharing with her in silence all the little details. How we trapped Lawrence, how Paula collapsed under pressure, how the truth finally came to light. I told her about the foundation, about the women we were already helping. When I finally stood to leave, I took the flash drive out of my pocket. I had kept it all this time, even after turning copies over to the authorities. It was a small object, almost insignificant, but it held the truth that changed everything. I placed it gently at the base of the headstone, next to the white roses. "I don't need it anymore," I said. "The truth is out there now. Everyone knows what kind of woman you were and what they did to you." As I walked back through the cemetery, I passed the spot where Lawrence and Paula had stood during the funeral, feigning grief, already planning how to spend my daughter's money. Now one was in a maximum security prison, and the other was behind bars too. And I, the harmless old lady they thought they could ignore, had been the instrument of their downfall. Doris was waiting for me at the cemetery gate, her face crinkled in a kind smile. "Ready to go home?" she asked. I took her arm and nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." And for the first time in a year, I really was. Ready to move forward, to honor Danielle's memory not just with tears, but with action, to ensure her story, her bravery, inspired others to fight back against those who tried to silence them. Because in the end, Lawrence had been right about one thing: accidents happen. But justice happens too. And sometimes, just sometimes, a 70-year-old mother is exactly the nemesis an arrogant killer never saw coming.